Hello, everyone. I am David Hall. I'm a professor in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Calgary, and I'm hosting today's webinar titled Beefing Up the Post-COVID Economy, Livestock as a Driver of Growth. You can see before you a farm-to-table graphic, which describes the process of cattle going right from the farm at the start, feed production in the farm, all the way through the process up to the consumer. And we'll be talking about that today. But first, let me just thank you all for joining us and mention that the School of Public Policy is Canada's leading policy school, known for our practical research and for bringing people together to discuss important issues with experts, which is what we will be doing here today. If you have to leave early, know that recordings of webinars are posted on the School of Public Policy website, and you'll be receiving a link in a follow-up email. If you have questions, you can post questions in a Q&A box below. We'll try to pose them to our speakers if we have time. We have a large panel today of 5 members, so we may not get to all the questions. I'll try and condense them though if I can. One more word about the School of Public Policy. I also want to note that the Simpson Center at the school focuses particularly on agriculture and food-related issues and environmental issues associated with agriculture. Well, let me invite the panelists in to start their videos as well, if you can see them. As I said, we have a wide range of panelists with us today representing that farm-to-fork value chain. So going through that value chain, I'll start with Cherie Copithorne-Barnes. And Cherie is the director of Calgary Stampede, and as well, she's also cow-calf operator. We also have with us Kendra Donnelly. And Kendra is a feedlot producer, and she runs a family farm feedlot and extended family, Korova feeders. So she's with us today as well. We have Sterling Fox, and Sterling is with us today representing, he's the Director of Procurement representing JBS, and some of you may not know JBS, but they are, I believe, the largest meat processor and distributor in the world. They also own and operate a large processing plant down in Brooks, Alberta, which you may have heard about. And Sterling will tell us more about that, I'm sure. We also have Joanne MacTaggart with us, the Vice President of Internal Development for Northland Restaurant Group, which includes Moxie's. And last time I celebrated a successful PhD student defense, it was at Moxie's, so thank you for that. We also have who am I missing here? Nicole Zaney, and Nicole is a Senior Manager of Strategic Supply with McDonald's Restaurants of Canada. Not just great hamburgers, but the finest chocolate milkshakes in the world. So thank you for that. Right, just before we get to the panel and the discussion, I want to spend about 5 minutes or so talking about a little bit about the beef sector, because I don't expect everybody on this webinar is familiar with some of the details. So let me give you some background information. I'm not going to go over 5 minutes because we want to get to the panel. So about 90% of us Canadians are meat eaters. And that sounds like must be a lot of meat that goes through Canadians, but in fact that's changed over the years. If you think about the last 35 to 40 years, the volume of consumption of beef has changed. It was about 35, 40 years ago, it was around 40 kilos per person in Canada. That's reduced to about 25 kilos per person nowadays, and yet chicken has been the reverse of that. Chicken went from 17 kilos per person to around 37 kilos per person over the same time period. But that's not all doom and gloom for the beef sector, because during that same time frame, Canadian beef exports increased fivefold, more than 500% of exports over that same time period. A lot of those exports go to the United States, but so too they go to countries such as China, South Korea, and countries in Asia. And why has that happened? Well, because of changing tastes and preferences. Just like back home in Canada, there have been changing tastes and preferences in Asia and other parts of the world, partly because of an increasing income level, and consumers there have a desire to eat away from home. They like to have dinner away from the house in the evenings, if you've been to Asia. And a lot of that is beef that's coming from Canada and our competitors. So just to give you a reference to that, Canada is about the third or fourth largest exporter of agricultural products that are exported in the world, partly because we've got such a large land base and not a very large population. The population density is very small in Canada. So we have the luxury of being able to produce a great deal of food and supply much of the food we produce to the rest of the world. Well, that means that it's generating a great deal of revenue for Canadians in general, for the producers, of course, but also for other people that work in the agricultural sector. That includes the processors, the transporters, the retail sector, the restaurant sector, etc. And if you think about primary producers, meaning farmers, ranchers, that's around 1.5% of the total population of Canada. Not that large. But if you think about the number of people that are employed by and rely on the agri-food industry as a primary source of income, that's about 12.5 to 14% of Canadians. So it's a very important part of our economy and of our sector. A couple other facts and figures for you. Let's see now. The number of cattle, beef cattle in Canada is around 13 million and a population of 37 million people. And I mentioned that not quite half of that is exported in terms of not just beef products, but live animals as well. We have about 60,000 people who say they are beef farmers, meaning more than half of their agricultural income comes from beef cattle. There's quite a wide range of that, from the cow-calf operators, where it all starts, calves born from cows on grass. They typically will move to a feedlot where they are finished, not all of them, but many of them. And then there's the processing sector, where they may be going through a slaughterhouse and they're processed into further products. And much of that is exported, as I said. So we need people to manage the export chain. There's people like myself who are veterinarians, we have economists, we have risk management experts, etc. All kinds of people in that whole chain to make sure that it runs efficiently. Over time, that chain has been, efficiencies have been introduced into the chain, into the value chain, that farm to fork value chain, which has meant that numbers of farms have come down considerably, but numbers of livestock per farm have increased considerably. So there's fewer farms, but more animals per farm. And that has been in many ways because of innovations, biotechnology, innovations in operations management and so forth, feeding efficiencies, etc. And again, it's a very important part of our economy here in Canada, where we've got all that land on which to grow and capitalize on. Well, along comes COVID-19 and bam, everything changes. It has really hit us hard. It's been very impactful, negatively impactful on our health, of course, human health. And it's also been very negative on the impact it has had on our economy and agricultural economy as well. So one of the questions that we're posing today is, what sort of changes are afoot? How can we maintain and expand the agricultural, the beef economy in Canada and all those livelihoods that depend on it? Just to put that in perspective, with COVID-19 and the closures in place, Canadian consumers have increased by 30% the amount of food that they purchase from grocery stores and retail, meaning that they, as you know, a lot of the restaurants that we normally go to have had to close down because they simply can't afford to maintain the staff that they normally would have. So that's a concern for us, and we want to talk about that a bit today as well. So without further ado then, I'd like to begin the discussion. And I think my first question is with respect to innovation. And when I say innovation, we sometimes think of that as being technology, biotechnology. And I'm not just referring to, for example, vaccines and feeding efficiencies, but innovation can also mean financial innovation. For example, how can we support beef farmers during the time of COVID-19 so that they maintain their operations and expand their operations when we're back to an expanding economy, which we expect might take up to a year to happen. So I'd like to turn to our first guest panelist. I'd like to ask Cherie, could you please address that question of what has COVID-19 meant to your operations and where do you see the future headed?
Well, honestly, from the cow-calf perspective, when COVID hit that last spring, it really didn't affect us at all. I mean, we were going to have calves hitting the ground whether there was a pandemic in place or not. I think from our perspective, we saw the packing plants shutting down. We saw consumers starting to look for product definitely on the shelves that wasn't there. And it made us realize how vulnerable we were. From the cow-calf perspective, I don't believe we've yet seen the impact, because from our perspective, the problem or the potential problem that could lie ahead of us is the uncertainty of our fall run, which is when we bring the calves in off of the cows, wean them, and hope that there's a market out there to be able to sell them to the next stage, being usually a feedlot operator or someone who's got extra feed on the properties to be able to background them. So as an industry, I think we are headed into our COVID perspective on this one, and it's going to be time that tells how the system is able to absorb the calves that are coming, how well the packers have done to be able to empty out the feedlots ahead of us, and we just haven't seen it yet. From an innovation perspective, I think the best thing that we've done is really gotten to know the other members along our beef value chain. It's been the collaboration that we now understand how each of the various levels work, right up to and including retail and food service, which is something very new for us. We hadn't really done that in the past properly. We'd kind of made assumptions that our industry experts were talking to them, but we'd never really learned how we fit into that. And I think that in itself is going to help us understand as cow-calf producers how we need to be designing, and I call it creating or designing the cattle that are needed to be able to fit the various niches that our marketers need and want going forward. And that's where the opportunity lies.
That's an interesting point. When you say designing cattle, we think of genomics, genetics, and as I said, changing tastes and preferences. We've had a change in taste and preferences for the amount of marbling or fat content in our steaks, which comes back to people like yourself who are selecting the right cattle to appropriate that amount of fat. So, Kendra, to you, please. What has that meant for the feedlot operator, where the calves may grow up a bit on grass, they grow to a certain size, and then they're moved to the feedlot for finishing?
Yeah, so COVID has impacted the feedlot industry fairly significantly with the slaughterhouses closing down. And we're kind of the middleman to a degree where, you know, Cherie's calves would come to me in the feedlot, which then we would finish those calves up until head to Sterling for processing to produce a high quality beef. And so I would completely agree with Cherie, is that how can we work as a whole food supply chain to improve that? And I think COVID just heightened it, not just for industry, but for the public and government as well, is what can we do to improve our food security? And beef is a big part of that conversation because we're so complex. So that's exciting in the sense of, like, for sure, it has been very impactful economically and financially for us, but we also see this as an opportunity to learn and work closer as an industry to get products to consumers that they're asking for. And then on an innovation standpoint, along with COVID in the food and agriculture industry, we got hit by that crazy hailstorm that ripped through Alberta. And I just wanted to highlight how beef is a big player in trying to utilize those resources that have now been cut out of the food supply chain for humans, but still have the nutrients and quality product to be fed to cattle. So cattle are a big conversation around, so the hailstorm hit, the barley or wheat or canola or peas were damaged, that plant was damaged, so they can't reach the human food supply chain, but they can reach the cattle supply chain because they, it's still a high quality nutritious product for cattle, which then we produce this lovely, high quality, highly dense protein product, which we call beef. And that's really exciting if we can continue to work as a whole food supply chain. How can we improve to produce more food with fewer resources? And multiple generations within agriculture has had that discussion for many generations, and now the public's wanting it, government's wanting it, and that footprint discussion starts to becoming a critical piece. And the beautiful thing is agriculture has been doing that for multiple generations, and we're excited to now be part of the solution there for Canadians. So.
Thanks, Kendra. One of the points I'll reiterate that you made is that not everyone on the call, on the webinar, may know that cattle, which are classified as ruminants, a particular type of digestive system that they have, they're able to break down the cellulose, the plant linkage cellulose that creates the fiber of grass, and that they can turn into energy, just like we turn glycogen and glucose into energy. They're able to do that. Humans are not able to do that. And monogastrics, like humans and pigs, for example, can't do that. So cattle are very efficient in terms of grasslands and in terms of, as Kendra mentioned, some of the crops that may get damaged but can still be a resource for feeding to cattle. Sterling, over to you, please. What has this meant to JBS and to the meatpacking and processing industry? How has COVID changed your industry, and what do you think will this mean for moving forward?
Thanks for having me. Really, you know, JBS from our harvest facility standpoint, we've made certainly significant investment, and I guess to start off, for JBS globally, you know, human safety is our first priority. Food safety is a close second, and we've made significant investments into essentially all of our facilities. But if we're just talking about Canada, we made significant investments in the Brooks harvest facility, as well as we have a Calgary case-ready facility and Belleville, Ontario as well. So across the board, we've tried to do everything we possibly can to make our team members safe. You know, on the innovation side, we look at it just a little bit different. It's not just a straight CapEx investment in R&D or investment in things that go into the facilities or into the plants. We tap into what we feel is our greatest resource, our team members. We do put a lot of money into developing our team members. Just to give you an idea, outside of COVID, I mean, we have sustainability goals. One of our sustainability goals for 2020 was water reduction. Essentially, we used baseline numbers from 2013 to 2015, and we had a target to save 34% of our water. Ended up very, very happy to say we ended up saving 40%. We had a water reduction of 40% at our Brooks harvest facility, and a big portion of that was we call continuous improvement teams. So basically, we engage our team members in the facility to brainstorm, get into groups, and come up with ideas on how we can go throughout the facility and save water. A part of this as well is, you know, we made some significant investments into recycling systems, but just as much of that was the continuous improvement teams, just engagement of our team members.
It's quite a remarkable reduction, 40% reduction. I'd really be interested to know more about that. Coming back to something you said, though, about that is of critical importance in many workplaces, ensuring that our workers, the staff of a facility, whether it's small office space or a very large processing plant, ensuring that everybody stays safe. And we know that if somebody is infected with this nasty SARS-CoV-2 virus, they can take it home to their family and may not even know it. And they may not know it for 10 days, for example. Meanwhile, they're infecting other people. So it's been of critical importance in places where there's a high density volume of people, et cetera. And the food industry has been identified as being an essential service. Of course, it's essential. We have to eat, we have to survive. So Sterling, can you give us an example of what sort of changes have been implemented?
There's a plethora of things that we've done. Basically, taken all of our cues from Alberta Health Services. They've just been phenomenal to work with. You know, basically, there's just way too many to list. But just from temperature checks coming into the facility, having healthcare personnel at the entrances into the facility say, look, to assess our team members coming into work. Certainly PPE throughout the facility, putting up barriers, making sure our team members have more time, more space on the lines. It's a several $1 million investment, and it continues to grow daily. There's new ways to improve, and we just want to continue to do our very, very best to make sure our team members are safe.
And continue delivering beef to the retail and the restaurant sector as well. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I'd like to turn now to Joanne. How has this impacted in the restaurant sector? We hear a lot about food service industry and the restaurant sector having lost a ton of revenue because people just could not go out to restaurants, and they're just starting to open up now. But this meant that many restaurants were in the very difficult position of having to lay off or even terminate some positions, and they just don't have the financial revenue to support the core personnel that are needed. So what changes have been put in place for assuring that you can bring customers back? There's some worries, for example, about is this beef safe? Is it going to hurt me? And I view that as not an anti-vaxxer position, but rather a hesitancy position. I think a School of Public Policy is also looking at health issues. And one of the issues that we've started to learn about is people who are negative about vaccines often are not complete and outright anti-vaxxers. They say, I'm hesitant, I'm not sure, I don't think this is safe, can you please try and convince me? So I imagine the restaurant industry is facing the similar sort of hesitancy that we see from people who just don't know and wish to be informed. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100% correct. The biggest challenge that we had back in mid-March was that within a matter of days, we were forced to close all of our restaurants. So we went from being fully engaged in, over 100 units across Canada between Moxie's and Chop, which is our steakhouse, to being completely closed down. So the logistics involved in just trying to close down those operations and take care of all of those people really absorbed us for the first couple of weeks. And then the next step, of course, was how are we going to survive? The agility required at that point was, okay, we can't have guests inside of our buildings, so we have to find a new way. We have to find a new way to actually contact our guests and continue to stay viable. So at that point, lots of creative people had to put their heads together and jump in. And we created a very detailed takeout and delivery business, which we'd always had a little bit of, but suddenly it became our lifeline. And also, restaurants are not critical. People come to restaurants to enjoy themselves and to feed themselves, but we knew that not a single person has to go to a restaurant. So we also had to reach out to people and kind of impede ourselves into the grocery sector a little bit. So we did put together grocery packs and trying to figure out how to do those things. And some of that has continued as we've reopened the restaurants. We are 95% reopened now for dine-in, with obviously varying capacities depending on the province and the area even within the province, because it isn't even thorough per province. So that's kind of how we got started and have been able to survive. And then your other question about the protocols that we had to put into place. So over and above just trying to make some revenue, of course, we had to reinvent exactly how we run our restaurants. And we were being faced with, and continue to be faced with, all kinds of rules and procedures and protocols that were changing by the minute and were inconsistent across Canada. So, we're a national company and try to do things in a very consistent manner. I mean, that's why people come to chain restaurants, because they can trust them and they know what to expect. So it was extraordinarily difficult to pull all that together and to maintain the agility to continue to evolve and change as new rules and regulations came in. But I believe we've hit it. We've hit it well. We have a series of audit procedures, both internal and external, to make sure that we are continuing to win the trust of guests. And I think that's what you're talking about, David, is, people are scared. And they want to get back to their pre-COVID lives, which hopefully include coming to restaurants very often. But we've got to do our part to make sure that they feel safe. And that's all about communication, and it's all about visual cues. So what does it look like when you drive up to the restaurant? What is the person wearing, and what do they say when they greet you at the door? What does our website say? What is the messaging that comes back to you digitally when you place a reservation? All of those things kind of add up to a picture of safety, and that's what we're continuing to do.
And have you had to be involved in retraining or providing additional training to your servers to help them understand answers that are appropriate for questions that consumers, your clients, might be asking?
Oh, 100%. And particularly at the beginning, we've of course been deep into this, studying all the nuances of it, but the public at large is only informed based on the amount of media that they're consuming. So, at the beginning, there was a lot of, why are you doing this to us? Why are you wearing those masks? Why can't we sit on top of each other? Why can't we put 25 people around a table? And so there was all kinds of explanation of why we weren't doing this to people. We were doing it for them. And that messaging had to be repeated over and over. And yeah, it was very difficult. We filmed internal training videos to try to get the messages across in a very clean manner, but it also had to continue to evolve and change as the public became more educated and things changed. We had to be able to respond to that new level of information.
I was on an interesting public health panel a couple of weeks back, and a representative from the Public Health Authority in Denmark was talking about their response to COVID-19, and not just in their agriculture sector, but in society. And one of her points was that the reason they felt it had been successful was because they had an all-of-society approach. And she said that, well, this works really well in countries like Denmark, where we believe everybody has a role to play. And I think in Canada, we're pretty much of that same mindset. She then sort of paused and said, that won't work in every country, but that all of society approach, it's a very important mindset that we need to keep in mind. And in the agricultural sector, there's no exception there. The farm to fork, it's an all of farm to fork approach in combating COVID-19, but also in helping us recover in the agricultural economy. Nicole, McDonald's, I know, has made some changes as well. Would you like to talk about that a little bit, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I think about the questions you've posed, David, there's a couple that are quite interesting, certainly on our side of the chain. But first, I want to thank you for the opportunity to talk and be on this panel. Let me first start by echoing what Joanne said, which is, when this hit, a lot of us had to grind our supply chains to, in some cases, a full halt. And in others, we had to make, dramatic adjustments to changes in demand as we watched our dine-in, close, and we watched our takeouts close. So we're really functioning on drive-through and delivery. And McDonald's is fortunate. We're very lucky that we have a strong presence already in that space. So for us, I think, managing through that, we were very fortunate. I will say that the biggest challenge we faced purely from a supply chain side is just the level of disruption across the entire supply chain. I mean, you got to realize we're purchasing so many different ingredients that go in our restaurants, and beef absolutely was particularly hard hit, with what happened in the facilities. But I'm incredibly impressed by the resiliency of the entire industry to recover from that. You know, I remember the day so vividly where we announced that we were making a temporary change to import beef to supplement, you know, our needs. And it was not a decision that we took lightly. We have a long-standing relationship with the Canadian beef industry, and we're deeply committed to it. So it was a very, very difficult day when we had to make that decision. What I will say though is throughout the whole thing, you know, we maintained a minimum of 80% Canadian beef, which we're particularly proud of. And I think that the hardest thing that, you know, I certainly faced was just dealing with family members, in an example, who, you know, again, are just so disconnected from agriculture that it's hard to sometimes understand, well, there's cows, how can there not be beef, right? And so it was a very interesting conversation for me on the supply chain side. I just tried to explain it to lay people in terms of what was happening. And, you know, we buy so much beef that something like this is very impactful to us. But again, I'm incredibly proud of the resiliency of the team. You had asked a question at the start of this regarding, you know, what types of innovations we've seen. And I would say, you know, from a supply chain side, the digitization of the world and the pace at which that has been going is certainly, you know, incredible. And, you know, it's just going to get faster. So I would say that the whole digitization of the supply chain is a huge innovation that I've certainly seen in my lifetime. And I would also add just the, it's not so much the innovation, but more the awareness around climate change. Like we've moved from a space of climate change to now climate action. And I think, you know, when we look at both of those things combined, it does require us to continue to, you know, advance really key initiatives, which of course, you know, beef sustainability is one of them. And for me, one of the things I think that has been most innovative for the industry. And it's a great opportunity to obviously, you know, make an impact, you know, on our planet, and also help reconnect people to food, which, you know, if there's one silver lining, and there's not very many, when you think about COVID-19, I do see Canadians' openness to learning more about food and appreciating, you know, just how much goes into stocking our shelves, you know, serving our guests in our restaurants. It is pretty incredible. And I just feel there's a great opportunity to get more exposure to Canadian agriculture and the role that it plays, not just in feeding Canadians, but also feeding the world, which goes back to your comment about export markets. We're very fortunate here.
Sure. Yeah. I'd like to just turn to a question that one of our participants joining the webinar has asked. And the question is, it's a question directed at the producers. And can you please comment on developing a direct-to-consumer model? Is this something you and your fellow producers are looking into? So Kendra and Cherie, either one of you, please.
Well, honestly, and Kendra could have a completely different perspective. It's very difficult to do simply because here in Canada, we don't have a lot of options with regards to where our slaughtering facilities can be. In Alberta, they've just relaxed some of the rules around selling direct to consumers. And it's something that's well appreciated, but it can be very precarious at the same time, because food safety is a massive issue that people have to remember as an essential part of this. So the important part is having the infrastructure in place, and it's complicated. And Sterling should be the one that can almost explain this as well as anybody as well, because people forget that when you sell an animal, you're basically going to be selling 60% of that animal. So are you prepared to handle the rest of it? Like, it's a lot more complex than a lot of people understand. And so it's something that's always in the back of our minds, but in reality, it's not what's going to save this industry. We need to be producing for the larger volumes, whether that's going to the food and retail service or whether it's being sold or internationally as well. So Kendra, I don't know what you would add to that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Cherie. And I think I think the general public would, visualize animal that they're purchasing kind of thing. And maybe they're just even interested in just knowing the farms that animal was part of prior to becoming beef. And I think with the different programs and relationships we are creating with Nicole and Joanne, and Cherie and myself and Sterling across the entire food chain, we're looking at ways through this data capture that Nicole spoke to about tracking these animals. We track every animal. We know where that animal has been, and now it's just a matter of telling the story and reminding the public that is cared through very sustainably, and animal welfare and health wise, that's very important to us. And if it moves from Cherie's operation to my operation, then to Sterling, and then to Nicole and Joanne, we're all part of the story. Now it's just a matter of getting Nicole and Joanne's help to tell that story, that we are trying to be the most responsible, sustainably sound, environmentally friendly, and we're all part of the story.
Sterling, you may have some comments as well. Direct to consumer models. Does that fit into JBS's model?
Yeah, and there's no question. I mean, if you look at something that COVID has done, it's certainly shone a light on the direct to consumer opportunities in many businesses, not just certainly not just the beef business, but across all sorts of different sectors actually. And the direct to consumer model from a JBS standpoint is there's some significant opportunities. China, for example, there's some significant opportunities for us to sell direct to consumer right in China. There's opportunities for JBS to sell direct to consumer within North America as well. So I think there's it's certainly opened our eyes to opportunities for our company to maybe go around, not necessarily go around the current system, but look to new ways to optimize returns for our product, and for Kendra and Cherie as well.
I'm thinking of another example where there was a nasty virus that circulated, avian influenza, high-path avian influenza in Asia. And I happened to be working in Thailand at the time, and Thailand is a huge exporter of poultry products, and much of their poultry product is headed to Japan. And at the time of avian influenza, of bird flu as it's called, Thailand's export market to Japan just closed overnight, because the Japanese said, look, we think you've got avian influenza. We don't want to import those chickens because we think they're infected, and we know it can infect humans. So no more chickens. And in the course of about 6 months, one of the largest processors, CP Foods, was able to turn around the industry, and they took whole poultry and they repackaged it, and they boiled them in plastic wrap packs. And once they were boiled and pre-prepared, they put them in boxes and shipped them out to Japan, and Japan accepted them because they knew that the virus had been killed and there was no risk anymore. So it's a nice example of innovation in the sector that have been hit very badly by a nasty virus, just like we're being hit by COVID-19. COVID-19 coronavirus, this particular one does not infect humans, cattle, I beg your pardon, infects humans, but not cattle. So it hasn't hit the cattle industry in terms of an infection, but there are other examples of viruses that can infect cattle and cause devastating losses. And when that happens, we are shocked to the degree that we have to find a way around that. We have to recover. So we've heard of a couple of examples of that already. I want to shift gears just a little bit and talk about consumers' preferences, consumers' tastes and preferences, and the messaging that consumers give us with respect to environmental concerns. And we hear them talk about greenhouse gases. And a second issue that sometimes isn't realized by all of my colleagues is the issue of animal welfare, and how sensitive consumers are to whether or not animals are treated respectfully and whether they have a decent quality of life while they're being raised. Certainly veterinarians are mindful of that, but if you look at the demands from the consumers, how is that reflected in at the feedlot and in the processing sector, and indeed in McDonald's and other restaurants, Moxie's, etc. So let's start again with Kendra and Cherie. Have you received that message in some way that has changed the way that you're producing, and has that affected your production systems at all?
You bet. We've heard that message loud and clear. And one of the challenges that we had as a beef industry is trying to figure out how to be able to quantify what we were already doing, I might add. It's nothing a whole lot new, but we needed to be able to bring it together in a way that Nicole and Joanne could actually market it, because you can't make claims without having something to back it. And that was one of the strong learnings that we had. And so with the advent of the Canadian Roundtable of Sustainable Beef, using programs that were already out in Canada, we were able to show exactly how we brought about, or how we quantify how we're managing the animals, how the environment was being impacted. And not only that, it allowed us the opportunity to start benchmarking, to show that we were in fact continuously improving upon it, and that there's changes that are being made, because every time we learn something and learn how to measure it, frankly, we learn how to improve upon it too. And so from the cow-calf side, finally we're able to really show and demonstrate in a verifiable way the things that we do and how we're making the next steps to improve it as well.
Kendra, how about you?
Yeah, so the program Cherie is speaking to, our family's also part of that on the feedlot phase of the animal. And so we, we're a cow-calf producer, we're a feedlot as well. And so we have animals that are on grass and also in the feedlot side. And those animals, no matter their environment where they're living, I wouldn't say they're managed any different. They are just as happy on grass as they are in a pen with their fellow animals. So, and those animals are fed, they're always watered. We have cowboys and veterinarians and nutritionists on site at all times. We care for those animals because in agriculture, if we're not responsible to our land, our environment, or our animals, we're not financially sustainable. And that's why sustainability is a key word in all of this, because oftentimes it's interchangeable when you're talking agriculture, because we rely on the land, we rely on our animal to be financially sustainable. And that's really important for the public to know. And Nicole and Joanne say that so much better than I can, but it's the truth. And this has been happening for generations, and now I'm the next generation. And it's no different than for me. The difference is that we're trying to be part of that communication to the public now.
Something I'd like to mention as an advocate for farmers, for agriculturalists. We often in the agricultural community refer to farmers as stewards of the land. And when we say stewards of the land, we really mean it. They're conscious and aware of maintaining the land in a condition that will make it viable for generations to come. And that's why they rotate crops. That's why they're careful about stocking densities. That's why they're careful about how many times tractors go onto that land, and trying to reduce the amount that they impact the land. And there's a new area of agriculture called precision agriculture, which is partly looking at increasing technical efficiency so that we don't have to use more resources than are necessary to maintain the productivity of that land. So stewards of the land, keep that in mind. Sterling and Nicole and Joanne, any other comments that you might have to add to what I was saying about ecosystems, eco-health, and environmental sustainability? Nicole, starting with you perhaps?
Yeah, I would say that agriculture and the health of our planet are inextricably linked. And I think, Kendra, you did a great job explaining it. So do not underestimate how you were able to articulate it. You did a great job explaining it. you know, at McDonald's, we made a commitment, a public commitment to reduce carbon emissions in our supply chain by 31% by the year 2030 using a 2015 baseline. So what that means for us is that, you know, we have to and will continue to work hand in hand with key stakeholders to support practices that contribute to CO2 emission reduction. And for us in Canada, you know, we're able to demonstrate that by our commitment to the CRSB certified beef in its supply that we're continuing to grow and build across our supply chain. And that's important because it does a lot of things. You know, it helps to validate the amazing work that Canadian ranchers are doing today. And it allows them to also be compensated for the work that they're doing in the space by customers that participate and purchase CRSB certified beef. So I think it is important that companies, you know, that are dealing with consumers, you know, restaurants and retailers, we need to continue to support, you know, and champion sourcing CRSB certified beef because it's really about the outcomes and what we're trying to drive. And I think, David, the other comment you had made, which was when I get a lot, is around antibiotics as well. And I very simply use the example that I went through with my daughter, which is a true story, and it was the one that kind of stuck with me. She had an ear infection, second bout, first round of antibiotics didn't work, and the doctor's like, well, you know, we need to put her back on. I was like, well, you know, she's already been on a round, and I was kind of skeptical. And I was basically about to walk out the door saying, we'll take our chances. And he goes, okay, but I'm about to tell you that it's going to rupture in the next couple of days if you don't fix it. And that was like, okay, then I guess I'll take the antibiotics, right? But my point is that I think there is a disconnect again between people understanding the role of these things in agriculture. And it's really used to help with the health of animals. And as long as it's being used responsibly, I mean, that's what we need to be focused on. I know, you know, I would never allow my daughter's ear to rupture. So if I needed to give her another round, a different one, I would have done it. But I just use that as an example and a way of really explaining it to folks in a way that's relatable.
Sure. Just a quick jump in there. Many of our webinar attendees may not know, but there have been some considerable changes in the Health of Animals Act and with respect to antibiotic use in livestock. And now it's required that if the antibiotic is of human concern, in other words, for example, penicillin is an antibiotic that we use in both animals and humans, then the producer is required to get a prescription from a veterinarian to use that antibiotic in their animals. In other words, there has to be somebody with high level knowledge of whether or not that antibiotic is really needed in the first place. And from my extensive experience working with farmers and farming myself, I think it's a little bit overstated that farmers are using antibiotics all the time in animals. They're not. There are cases where they were overusing them, definitely, and we can always use less, but you need the experts in that farm to fork supply chain to be able to step in and say, here's my expert opinion, this is why I went to school, and this is not necessary, this is necessary, and it's all about protecting the public, and veterinarians are in service of the public. We're constantly reminded of that, and we work in partnership with all of the other members that we've talked about on that farm to fork supply chain. I think Joanne and Sterling, did you want to also jump in there?
Sure, I'll you know, with you know, Nicole, I guess I'm going to put the gauntlet down. We actually from our 2013 to 2015 baseline to 2020, we did reduce our carbon by 30%. So it can definitely be done, and we're very proud that we were able to accomplish that goal. We have a new set of goals coming out very, very shortly for our 2030 goals. So we have a long ways to go, but we're very, very happy with the improvement that has been made. And just a note, I don't know if everyone on here understands, at least at our facility in Brooks, we do have 24/7 third-party video monitoring within our facility. That means the yards are basically under video, have video. Basically, throughout the entire plant, there's video everywhere, and we do have a third party auditors looking at that every day, essentially. So it just kind of helps us go to bed at night knowing that everything's being done the right way here. We're making sure our team members are doing the right things.
Good. Joanne, just before I turn to you, I'll interject. And I know that in several restaurant chains or in other countries where I go into restaurants and buy dinner, what have you, I notice that sometimes there's a branding or a specific logo attached to some products that says environmentally friendly or animal friendly or that sort of thing. In other words, consumer pressure has directed that in not just the restaurant sector, but in the retail sector as well, consumers are looking for those sorts of reassurances that the animals were treated well and that it is the products are produced in an environmentally safe manner or environmentally conscious manner. How has that affected your business in any way?
Well, I think it's affected us in that we are the communication channel. It was interesting to hear Cherie speak about the fact that, promoting things that they've always done. Well, I think that we have a key role in that. The public at large is more interested than ever about learning where things can come from and how they're produced and how it affects them. That whole equation of start to finish has had to become so much more transparent. And our role, I think, and I love Kendra's phrase, tell the story, because we use that phrase in our business all the time, particularly with regard to training. And our whole philosophy of training has changed over the last 5-ish years to go from, just telling people what things are to really explaining and involving them and allowing them to truly understand and share the story. So I think that's a huge piece of it, is to really kind of reveal what was underneath there the whole time, but bring it to light in, of course, the most positive manner and in a way that people can really understand and believe in. The authenticity of that is the critical piece.
To the panel, I'm getting some very positive comments. People are impressed that GHG emissions have been reduced and impressed at the reduction in the water used in facilities as well. So well done to all of you participating in that. There was a question also that I'd like to ask the panel. Do you think that producers are more vertically integrated? Do you think that producers that are more vertically integrated are more protected from COVID-19 pressures? I'll explain that to the attendees who may not understand the question. Really what that's asking is that those industries or members of industry that tend to have a very focused supply chain where you know your partners more directly, and facility A generates product for facility B, which goes directly to the store, for example, vertically integrated, their own trucks, their own facilities. Have they in some way been more protected, do you think, than the more widely dispersed model?
I would say that there's definitely a positive way to say yes and no to this question. The fact is there's not a lot of total integration that goes on. Kendra's family is not unique, but it doesn't represent the majority of the industry. And so the fact that there are some programs that are available to us as cow-calf help, because we know that there's hope that there will be sales because we're producing the right kind of cattle for the programs that exist. But it's not something that we have a lot of options on right now at this time.
Yeah. The poultry industry tends to be much more vertically integrated than the beef industry is, but it sort of raises the point that I wonder if there might be some efficiencies that could be introduced, and really why I'm raising the question. Sterling, anyone else? Kendra, do you have other comments directed to that?
Well, with regards to COVID and vertical integration, I don't know that there is a massive, I don't know that there is a big advantage, to be honest with you, on vertical integration when it comes to COVID. I mean, you can put, and we've proven it, we can put an awful lot of investment into your facilities, but basically people do go home at night, and we've got to make sure we're doing things properly when we're at home as well. I mean, you can be as safe as humanly possible when you go to work in the day, but you still have to go home and continue that and be diligent when you're at home with the family as well. So I'm not convinced that vertical integration actually would help a great deal on the COVID front.
Kendra?
And yeah, I'll just make a quick comment. I mean, Cherie made the point in the beginning that it's such a complex industry. There's so many pieces to the puzzle, and why we haven't seen really vertical integrated companies within the beef. Other meat proteins, we do see that significantly, but we don't see that in beef simply because of the complexity, I think. And so it's really important for people like Cherie to focus on cow-calf and do a really great job on the cow-calf piece, and then let me focus on the feedlot production piece, and then let Sterling focus on the processing piece, because Sterling has to take all these different cuts of beef from the roast steaks, but tongue as well, and find the most value for each piece. And lots of that is exported. So I think we have to rely on each other to form that vertical integration through the CRSB program or other programs, simply because of the complexity of the beef supply chain. It's complex, but it's important and a huge opportunity for Albertans on an economic recovery standpoint for us to continue to invest and understand the pieces to the puzzle and do a better job on a sustainability, environmental, and financial and economic recovery standpoint. So.
Sure. We've got just a few minutes left, literally a few minutes left. So 30-second words from each of you, positive message going forward, the contribution beef will have in 2021 to recovering our economy. Kendra, you're up already. So what do you think? Positive message, yes?
Yeah, no, I think agriculture in general, but beef too, is like, there's a ton of opportunity. We have the land, water, sunlight, and resources here in Alberta. Let's utilize those resources and be part of the economic recovery story.
Thanks. Cherie?
I think it's been clearly stated throughout this discussion how articulate and how each layer of the beef value chain is contributing to a positive story with regards to greenhouse gas emissions, to sustainability issues. And I think it's something that going forward, as this is the School of Public Policy, I'd be remiss in not saying there's missed opportunity here. As our governments are looking at shutting down our natural resources because they don't like the way that they're not being managed, or they would prefer to go to green energy, take a look at the ecological goods and services that you've just heard about throughout this discussion. And let's start developing policies going forward that can, I call it bilateral policy development. If instead of shutting down a complete industry because they don't like it, let's start complementing each other as we grow and build in strength. And that'll allow time and economics to catch up to what needs to be done to keep this country going.
Thank you. Sterling?
I mean, a positive note for our industry is the export market, and that's where JBS sees the future of growth within our sector. And basically the export market has untapped potential. We have a ton of opportunity. We do have sales teams based in really every major trading partner's country. And I mean, we're just scratching the surface. And so there's a lot of opportunity for us.
Good, thanks. Joanne.
Yeah, I think the biggest message for me is that we know that the Canadian public loves beef. And we as the restaurant industry, and CHOP and Moxie's in particular, remain committed to bringing that beef to our guests and continuing to find new and innovative ways to do so, both in terms of the distribution end for us and using our ability to bring new products to market as well. So we're in this for the long haul, and we're going to continue to do our part here, both in terms of the product and the communication piece.
Okay, thanks. Nicole.
I think, David, I'm going to finish with what you kind of started with, which is in Canada, we're a country where we all work together. And if there's one thing I'm very optimistic about is that the beef industry works together across the value chain to continue to provide great protein to Canadians and to a lot of the world. And as everyone has rightly pointed out, beef is a really important protein. So I see a lot of positive. We just got to keep keeping on and supporting each other and talking and moving forward.
Good. Thank you. Well, we've heard a lot about vulnerability. We've heard about sensitivities, shocks to the system when something like COVID comes along. We've also heard a lot about the interconnectedness of the farm to fork value chain and how important it is to have relationships with your partners in the industry. That's very important in many of the agricultural industries in Canada. And don't forget, folks, you watching this webinar, how important agriculture is to household income, to tax revenue in Canada, our export markets. All of that can be sustained if we maintain what we've been doing and if we continue looking for innovative ways to expand our markets and to continue providing food for our Canadian consumers as well. I want to thank all of our panelists today. Thank you, everyone. Cherie, Kendra, Sterling, Joanne, Nicole, all of you for being here. It's been very insightful. And to the audience, thank you very much for joining us as well. You will be receiving an email, a follow-up email that includes a survey link, please, and also a link to the recording. So again, thanks everyone for being here. Stay safe, and we'll hope to see you again. Bye for now.
Thank you.